recording. And then give me 1 minute here while I set this up. And let me share my screen. There we go. Alrighty. Let's start out with new faces. Are there any new faces? Is there anyone who would like to introduce themselves today?
Well, I would like to reintroduce myself, Kevin Ortega, IBM. We are re-engaging back in the community with the Liberty Buildpack, and we've been working with Daniel with that. And also joining me is Hank, but I think he is having some audio issues. Hank, can you hear us?
Yeah, I fixed it. It was
Okay.
sound was going through my dock for some reason.
Well, I'm happy to have both of you back. Welcome back, Kevin. Glad to see you again. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, Hank, if you want to just say hi to everybody and what you're doing.
I'm Hank. I work with IBM on the IBM H2E server. Not sure what else to add.
Oh, he's short-term assisting my team in on the Liberty Buildpack.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for being here. Let's go ahead and jump right into outstanding RFCs, unless there are any other new faces that I missed. I realized I should have followed up on that. I think this looks like the general usual suspects. So let's go ahead and hop into outstanding RFCs. There are 3 of them. Let's start with this auto-generated reference documentation. I haven't made any moves on this. There's a lot of approvals. I kind of just waiting, I think, for it to be merged unless someone objects. So yeah.
I think we've asked a couple times at the working group meeting for language family maintainers to click approve if they're on board with this, considering it is like a thing they'll have to be kind of responsible for. There are a couple. Maybe we just treat the silence as tacit approval and go ahead and merge this, since we have mentioned it a couple of times already.
If we're comfortable with that, I'm fine with that. I could go through and assign a bunch of people to this PR, if that would make more better.
I feel like at this point, I'm kind of believing that if folks aren't openly objecting to it, then they're fine with the status quo and we can move ahead. So there's been plenty of time for objections at this point. And I wouldn't be terribly empathetic to hearing them, given that there was so much time to object.
Yeah, for sure. All right, in that case, then it sounds like this just needs to be merged. I think it's top level RSC, so that should probably be done. Is it? Yeah, so it should probably be done by someone on the steering committee. All right, great. We can move on to stack bomb. Actually, hold on, this is blocked. Should we just skip over this for now? Okay, and then this next one is also one of my RFCs around the source removal build pack and its potential inclusion inside of the Paketo project. I just before this meeting, I thought about actually moving this into a draft. There's been a couple of developments, mostly, or namely, I guess I should say, the upstream CMB project is proposing a set of universal utility build packs to be put into CNB, one of which is the purge buildpacks.io/purge, which is effectively a source removal build pack. I think it might make sense for me to go to them with source removal and say, hey, I have written this build pack and it has these features. What do you think? So I may put this RFC on the back burner for a little while and see what I can get done upstream as opposed to introducing something directly into Paketo. Sounds good. And with that, we are through our current open RFCs. So let's go into our agenda. First things first, we have libcnb v2 updates and questions. I think the first thing to mention for this is that I believe this week is one of the on weeks for the Buildpack authors tooling sync. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I believe that it is this week in their fortnightly rotation. And I think that if all goes well, based on some chattering that I saw in GitHub issues, there may be a Google Buildpacks maintainer there to talk about some of the needs that they have and they might want. So that might be something interesting for people to hear about.
I cannot attend this week, but it sounds like it'd be really helpful for some Paketo maintainer to be there. Is there someone else here who can commit to going?
I can commit to going to that.
Yeah, I should be there too. We also merged some changes into the V2 branch for source bomb creation. It's basically the same stuff that got merged into V1, but we also removed all the deprecated stuff instead of just deprecating it. I think there's a follow-up PR that's needed to get a couple more things changed, but it's mostly there.
Have they done any like milestone setting for what would actually move them from V1 to V2 for libcnb, or is that just still like we're playing with stuff and figuring out what we need?
Yeah, I got the impression it was still that kind of alpha state.
Fair enough. Are there any other updates that anyone has or would like to give on this? Great. Let's move into some other agenda topics. First up, GitHub Actions performance.
Yeah, I put this on there. I posted that question on Slack too. I'm curious to see if others are hitting performance issues with GitHub Actions. I very frequently, like almost every day, am waiting quite long periods of time for actions to complete running, upward to an hour sometimes, and it's definitely impacting getting work done. So I was curious if other people are hitting that same limitation or noticing something similar.
Yeah. Absolutely. Like
Yeah.
first thing in the morning, it seems like it's just slow out the gate.
Right. It seems like it's in the Eastern time, it's like around 10 o'clock it starts, and then by noon and things settle down and it works fine. And I don't know why that's the case. Every time I've tried to look into it to see what's running and what's queued up, there's the GitHub support tells me that we can have up to 20 actions running simultaneously. We're never even close to that limit as far as I can tell. And yet we have a queue of 100 plus items waiting to run. So it doesn't make a lot of sense to me why that's happening. And they haven't really been able to answer, support hasn't been able to answer that question either. I was just curious if and how much it's impacting others, if this is something we want to look into, possibly other ways to solve this, like I think a self-hosted worker or something like that, since we're not dependent on potential noisy neighbors, slowing us down.
Just to add an extra data point, I have run into this a bunch of times, almost always in the morning, and it does seem like it's getting worse even after we staggered a few of our actions and workflows that we have. It still hasn't made a difference at all.
I think I would be. I know that sounds bad, but I would be interested in still finding the root cause rather than throwing more stuff at it. I like one of the things that I can think of is like maybe something that happens in the morning is something like dependabot crons or something like that. So all of a sudden, every repo that we have is running dependabot tasks that may be super intensive. So maybe looking to see if that's affecting it, or if we could change dependabot's cron time and see if that has an effect on when we see the slowdown. That might be something interesting to look into.
Yeah, I know, like from the Java build pack side, we don't have any. We have lots of cron jobs that are like actions that are triggered, but we don't have any that are triggered at that particular time of day. They're essentially triggered at the same interval throughout the day. So that there isn't necessarily anything that would point to that particular time of day being slower than normal. And from poking around at other repos, I kind of got the impression it was similar. That there weren't any like jobs that were scheduled for 10 o'clock or or something that would be an obvious slowdown.
The only reason I mentioned something like dependabot is I know that that's a cron that happens at like a timed daily interval. Like it doesn't happen like every 15 minutes or an hour. It's like, you know, some time at some whatever. So that might be something worth looking into in terms of a, hey, this is a consistent thing, but I don't know.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not really sure where that, do you know where that would be set? Is that in, was there like a dependabot YAML or something?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Or
I'll poke
did they,
around and see.
or did they move that? I don't know. There was a dependabot YAML because it used to be an action and now it's a baked in feature, or maybe it's the other way around. I can't remember. Someone who actually knows what they're talking about should maybe chime in.
Okay. Yeah, it's I would very much like to see the the exact reason for this as well, but it's difficult because it is a hosted service and our visibility is very limited. Even at like the org level, like we don't have visibility into what's running across all of our repos. So the only way I've been able to look and see across the entire org is to basically script it out and and hit the API and run it, you know, to query what is actually running. So it's difficult to get a good picture even of what's running at any given moment.
I think that's reasonable. Yeah, I think it would also be reasonable as for us to investigate the self-hosted runner. I don't know where we would host that, which is something that we would have to look into as well. But
Yeah,
we might have to talk to the CFF about potentially giving us servers to let us host things.
yeah, it seemed like if we could even just have one runner somewhere that offloaded the, you know, the first you know, batch of things, you know, then if we got busy, we could overflow, you know, to the GitHub runners.
Just give the silicon a little bit of a chance to warm up.
All right. So I don't know. I'll take a look. I'll take an action item to look into it a little more and see what our options might be.
I think this will come up also in the ARM64 discussion, but the one downside to the runners is like they're a non-trivial support burden, maintenance burden for us. They don't do things like make sure that the runner is cleaned up and put back into a good state after the last action was run. So like we do run the risk of doing things like having non-reproducible builds because the runners aren't cleaned up properly and so on and so forth.
Okay. Yeah, that was my fear about it as well, is like how much work do we have to take on to manage something like that? I had secretly hoped that there's some company out there you could pay to do it, since it doesn't seem like you can pay GitHub to have dedicated resources.
And you think GitHub would want to offer that as a service?
Right.
I'll point out that I think the first time that you raised this, Dan, it was around the time that we had just rolled out some new actions on pull requests around like label enforcement. I don't know if that's like correlation or causation, but if it's something that you want to try, there's like a few workflows that we could try turning off to see if that is the smoking gun here.
I don't know if we have to turn them off. I mean, you could just check and see how frequently they're running. Maybe it's running more often than we expected, but it seems like if it's only running on a pull request, it's probably not likely to be the culprit.
I just remembered that you mentioned a while ago that maybe we should decrease the frequency that the dep server like version checking workflows run, because they run every 15 minutes across every dependency. I completely forgot to ever change that. So I can also put that in and see if it makes any difference and decrease that to like hourly, I think we had said.
Okay. Yeah, that would help.
I think recently this has been like on my like long list of stuff I've seen and I just need to like file an issue for. I think there's a bug in the like labeling, the auto labeler code, which is like when the PR, when it reruns the tests, it assumes that it has to do auto labeling. If a maintainer's already applied a label like Semver minor, then before it knows whether or not it is actually going to be able to automatically label, it removes the label. And so either way, you're back in this state of like, now I as a maintainer have to go and manually add the label that I already had. I think the bug is just that like, it should check to see if it can add a label before it removes the label that's already maybe applied. I think like there's stuff like that that maybe is like possibly increasing the amount of actions and stuff that we like end up running overall, just like because of the fact that it's creating, you know, action runs that don't maybe need to be run.
All right, so it sounds like we have a couple of action items that we can take out of that. One of which is potentially looking into what it would be to do a self runner, maybe looking to see if we can change when we do our Dependabot stuff, and decreasing the amount that we like increasing our cron interval. Sounds like a couple of things that we could do, as well as filing some issues that maybe will remove extraneous task running.
Or we could all just start working at noon, right?
Yeah. All right. Is there anything else that we would like to hit up on this GitHub Actions performance? Great. Let's move on to our next item, which is ARM64.
Yeah, I put this one up here. We've recently, and we've been getting a lot of requests for a while, but recently we've seen an uptick in requests for support for ARM64. I can link the specific thread for the issue where people have been coming in. And it's at the point where we have like a handful of users asking like what our timeline is, or if we have anything prioritized to work on supporting this. And I think we've mentioned this before, but it's going to require quite a bit of work on our end to get everything up and running. But it seems like there are people willing to contribute to getting this feature. But at the current time, we don't really have anything in place to even like enable people to contribute. So I kind of wanted to figure out first, like maybe discuss like if we know fully what the use cases are, and then also maybe discuss some options if anybody knows anything about what we could do, like what the most minimal set of things that we could do would be to kind of like unblock people who maybe want to contribute features around this. But first, I wanted to just open up the floor and see if anybody has been thinking about this or looking into it, or has any experience with our build packs on ARM64, since I don't think we've had a super formal discussion about it at one of our working groups.
As far as use case, people that I've talked to seemed like initially were asking about it for Raspberry Pis, which was kind of a novelty case. So we didn't really do anything. And then obviously the Mac M1 is really, I think, what's driving this resurgence of it now. A lot of people are getting them and having some trouble with running build packs on there. Unfortunately, VMware doesn't give them to us, so I can't try it myself to see if it does or doesn't. There's probably some rough edges, but it's been someone that I asked about it that has one said they were able to run Docker, Docker desktop. And if you ran everything through a Rosetta terminal, that it should just work. But that really just sidesteps the issue because it's running through emulation and not directly. And then the third case I've heard, which has been, I think maybe only from one person or two people, is that what is it? AWS has I think it's called Graviton instance that you can use now that has that is an ARM server. And so people are starting to look at that. I think it's cheaper than some of the other ones or something like that. So there is some motivation from that side as well.
That's helpful. I guess my main question is like, what do we actually need to do in practice to kind of move this along? It doesn't have to be like something that we drop everything else that we're working on to do, but I would at least like to like converge as a group about like our general consensus about what our plan will be, or if we can even give a timeline about when we might think about this, or if we can do anything to unblock people.
So there's a few things that I see as like intertwined problems. The first one is we don't have any mechanisms to actually run anything that's on an ARM64 architecture in our current kind of development or CI processes. So GitHub does not support ARM64 in their runners. And so if we wanted to, we would have to have our own runners. This again gets back to the maintenance burden and complexity involved with maintaining our own runners and what that means for the jobs we have. So there's that problem. The second problem is the dependencies that we ship will have to be rebuilt and compiled and packaged to run on ARM64. Currently, we're leveraging a huge amount of crufty old code from the original Cloud Foundry build packs to package all of our dependencies. That code is not in a terribly great state for us to like continue to use and move over to another architecture. I'd prefer to see us have a better solution for building maintainable dependencies on the different architectures we want to support before we start to kind of expand the set of architectures that we support. The last part has to do with the artifacts that we ship. So OCI and Docker more generally have support for these things called like multi-architecture or multi-target images. Basically what you can say is, here's an image with a name, something like Paketo Buildpacks /builder or full. And then what ends up happening is when Docker or whatever your container runtime is goes to pull that image from the registry, it also provides what architecture it's planning to run. And then it's able to get back just the parts of the image, the layers that are belonging to that particular architecture. The problem we have is that there aren't any packaging tools for us to use coming from upstream. So like Pack itself doesn't support like multi-architecture builds. So they gave us kind of like half of the problem, which is a life cycle that's capable of running on ARM64, but they haven't really helped us to solve the other half, which is how do we get Buildpack images? How do we get builder images that are also capable of having these multiple architecture targets? We could go and solve that problem ourselves, but preferably you'd like to see that upstream. I don't know what their plans are. I haven't really talked to them about that particular half of the problem. Those are the three things I see as like kind of big problems to solve in trying to get us to ARM64 support. I don't know if there are others. They're just the first three that come to mind for me.
You have to figure my ignorance on this. Would we also need supported stacks as well? So we would need x86 Ubuntu stacks and ARM64 Ubuntu stacks as well. So that's just a whole other.
Yes. Those are a little bit easier for us to build and support because we're not using CMD stooling to like create those things. We're just using basic like Docker commands and stuff. But still, yes, we would have to create artifacts.
I guess it's just hard for me to wrap my head around this because, as you mentioned, there are so many, like, not barriers to entry, but so many like major things that we would have to do to even get this into like a working state that I'm kind of at a loss, like where we should even begin, or if this is something that we should even begin, which I kind of feel like it is, given the fact that like there is lifecycle support for upstream and we have, I don't know, a handful of people asking about it, but I also just don't know how to like weight that against other priorities we might have.
If I had to put my 2 cents in on where I would start picking at it, it would be with what Ryan was saying about us leveraging a bunch of crufty code that is sort of legacy and isn't particularly modular. I think that you could do work to refactor that code to make it modular while you're working on something like getting support for multi-image, whatever, pushing for builders in the upstream, and then you're sort of on your way if you're looking for something to start. I don't know if that makes sense to everyone else, but
Yeah, that seems valid.
May I ask a quick question? Can we put together just so that I have an understanding, like what the breadth of the work looks like? Can we put together like a mini kind of like just like bullet point, like these are the things that we would need to do, not necessarily like individual stories, but just kind of just so that I understand like these are the moving pieces, because we had talked about potentially doing a spike to investigate the work. So if we can at least outline what we would all need to do, and then we can potentially put together, I think, Sophie, what we also talked about was putting together maybe like some form of very high level t-shirt size to what the effort actually looks like, so that way then we at least have that to go off of when, if this comes up again in the near term, we can say we have looked into it and this is what it looks like and we haven't prioritized it yet. I'm still trying to figure out how to collectively work with you guys to communicate outwards in terms of where this might fit on the roadmap for like fiscal year 2022 or 2023. It's really hard because we don't have like cloud providers outside of what Daniel mentioned earlier about the Gravitron processors that Amazon has. Right, Google doesn't support it. Microsoft has some kind of strange Azure IoT Edge flavor of something that may or may not be able to leverage this down the road. But yeah, if we have that plan in place at least, and that estimate, I think that would be a great place to start. And then we could figure out what we could start chipping away at, maybe smaller pieces of it, like you said.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I can take that action item to put something together. I'm not sure where the best place to put that would be. Like, what's a nice top level project wide place I could put that kind of list or discussion?
You could use the existing Miro, maybe?
I think I prefer to do something in GitHub. Oh yeah, explorations, Frankie said, something like in GitHub that's like easily accessible. Yeah, I can take that action item. And then additionally, I think the fact that we have a workaround that Dan had outlined in this issue around using Rosetta emulation mode is a fair workaround to like kind of document and pass out to people in the meantime until we can start, like you said, chipping away at this. Cool. I think I got enough context in this conversation that I can start with like writing something up, and maybe we can talk about it next meeting. Thanks, everyone.
Sure. Is there any more comments on ARM64 that anyone else would like to make? All right, that brings us to the bottom of our agenda. Is there anything that anyone would like to bring up before we adjourn this meeting? All right, everyone, have a wonderful week. See y'all.